Annie Sloan.
And I'm Tristan Merriam.
And this is The Colourist,
a podcast all about colour and its influence on our lives. So today we are talking about blues, and specifically one of your blues, Aubusson Blue, and linking it to painted furniture in Sweden. And we're actually going to be doing 2 episodes on Swedish design in the 18th century. But I want to know why. What is so important about this topic that means we devote not 1, but 2 episodes to this?
Well, I suppose for me, Sweden is the heart, it's the pulsing heart of all painted furniture. It's where I first got really involved, and they did actually just paint everything. It was, and I've always said paint everything.
I was going to say that's one of your mottos, isn't it?
Yeah, they did. They painted everything: walls, ceilings, floors, furniture, obviously, everything, and in lots of different styles. So grand houses to more humble homes, everything.
And why? Why did they paint so much? How did that come about, do we think?
Well, I think it's really interesting. So there, in the 17th century, Sweden was one of the richest, incredibly rich country. They had iron, copper, and something else, I can't remember what. And I think it was linen, that's right. Interesting collection. So they had those 3 things which made them very, very rich, and they were sending it all over the world, so very rich. But then in the 18th century, they were not so rich. And so, but they had been used to a very grand lifestyle. So instead of having to import all these things, obviously from France, because France was the epitome of style then, and they would try to copy it themselves. So they got ordinary craftsmen, they're local craftsmen. They couldn't, to make furniture and to do all sorts of things. They had an abundance of wood, so they can do anything with wood. And, they would take a design that was quite fancy and it would be slightly simplified by their local craftsmen. And instead of importing silks for their walls, they would start getting linen, abundant still, and they would print onto it and put it on their walls. And they did printing. When I say printing, it would be stencils, actually. And so developed this extraordinary and very unique style, which I think is amazing. And I particularly like it because we can really relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very relevant to 21st century living.
It really is. And the grander styles are really beautiful. I mean, I know you were looking through a book and going, well, this is really nice, but I can't relate to it because this is an amazing palace. Well, we don't live in palaces.
No.
Well, only I do.
It's the simpler designs that appeal to me, and I think probably most people.
Yeah.
More decorative finishes.
Yeah, very decorative. And of course they were done by probably, craftsmen who were not trained artists.
No.
So that's who we all are.
So it's a huge, huge topic, and as you've said, a huge inspiration for you. One of the biggest, probably. Hence why we're doing 2 episodes on this. So the first is really linking it to Aubusson Blue and blues generally. And we're going to come on to that in just a second. The second episode is going to be about Scandinavian pink. So similar topic, similar era, but 2 colours within that to pick out and make relevant. But before we get into all of that, let's go back to pre-18th century when there was no or little blue in interiors in terms of paints.
That is right. We should pause there because I think that's mega. There was no blue in interior decorating.
No.
For your average person, there was no blue. And now, blue is ubiquitous. We all love blue, but then, no.
Very rare. It existed in terms of fabrics and dyes. So can you tell us where blues were used so we have a better understanding of what came before the actual blue paints and pigments?
Well, I can't say there were no blue pigments, there were, but they were very expensive. So there'd be lapis lazuli, which was ground from an amazing stone found in the high mountains of Afghanistan and a few other places. And so it was very rare and very expensive and very difficult to get. So those were the special blues. And you see it in old paintings, medieval and going on. And it would be used for the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
Because it was expensive and special.
She was always portrayed in blue.
In blue, yeah. So that was, you did sea blue. So it must have been amazing to see blue. Where, can you imagine? No blues at all. And then you see this Virgin Mary with a blue.
Well, it makes it even more special and wonderful and awe-inspiring.
Yeah. So there's that. So there were some other blues, coppery blues, but not like a real blue. So they were azurite as well, but it's quite a turquoisey colour.
Mm-hmm.
So the only other blues that were available were dyes, and a dye and a pigment are completely different. A plant can't colour a paint.
Yes. This is where the science, geeky, nerdy side comes in, which I love. So explain that, because most people might think you can mix up anything that gives you a sort of colour or pigment and make a paint with it. No. But that's not the case.
No.
Not with plants.
You can do a dye, you can get indigo, you can get woad. They're both plants and they can make dye fabric. You can dye fabric with that. So you've got indigo, everybody knows about chintz and all sorts of other, and woad. They did use woad too. That is all fabrics. And the blue would be not, I don't know, it could be quite a strong blue.
Depends on the plant and where you got it from. And weren't there some places in Scotland where they used lichens?
Yeah. Well, I've only read this once, but I did read that they used lichens or lichens to get a particular blue. I don't know why, but it seems that it says in my head that it was ochre. I don't know if that's true. And they found sort of places where there was this blue as a sort of a dado colour, and they think it came from there. But that might be in my dreams, and I've added 2 and 2 together and made 22.
Probably not. It's come from somewhere. And what about denim?
Oh, yeah, denim. That's amazing. So from denim in France, and it was indigo dyes. And that's now it's ubiquitous again. We use dyes. That makes it's not indigo anymore, of course, but that's where it came from. So blue dyes were used, but there was no blue paint.
So it was perceived as a very special colour because it was so hard to get. Only the very rich, wealthy people had that colour in their homes of any description.
Yes, they would have had fabrics in those colours.
But it was sought after. It was wanted.
Sought after. Yeah.
So when was the pigment invented then, which enabled it to become used as a paint as opposed to a dye?
Right. So it was invented I think it was in Berlin in 1709, but it wasn't until the later part of the 18th century, about 1790, I think, when it became more used. And first of all, it was artists that used it, and then gradually it was used so that you could buy it. I suppose it would be to do with price. Mm-hmm. So artists would use little tubes of paint, or they wouldn't have tubes, little bits of paint, pigment, and they'd mix it to make their own paint. But gradually it became so that you could make it to make a paint. And so that's where you get the whole idea of, you'd have to be very rich to use it, of course. But, the 18th century, Mr. Darcy in his wonderful house in Jane Austen, whenever they do films, they've always in a blue room, because that would have been just suggesting how rich and expensive it was. It's amazing.
It is amazing, and you're absolutely right. If we think back to all of those films and series and people, blue. And now when people rewatch that, they'll probably go, oh yeah, blue room. So do we know who invented this pigment, this Prussian blue? There's links to Berlin.
I think it was Berlin, and I think he was called Diesbach. Nobody really talks about it, but it was a mega thing.
Huge.
In my world, it's mega. And it sometimes it's called Berlin blue. If you buy artist pigments, it's sometimes called Berlin blue, but it's often called Prussian blue.
Okay. So for those people listening who might not know Aubusson Blue, which is your colour, they shouldn't they? But they might not, you never know. Or they don't know what Prussian blue looks like. Describe Prussian blue as a blue. What sort of blue is it?
It's a very deep blue, and it's slightly on the greener side, I would say. So actually they did make greens out of it too at that point. I think there's a colour called, I may be wrong, there's Shields green. Anyway, they're all connected. But this blue, Prussian blue, what I've used it for is to get that deep blue that's slightly towards the the green. So when I went to art school, I was told to go out and buy all the colours that I'd need. You don't have to buy every colour, but you would buy 2 blues. And so one blue would have been towards the green part of the spectrum, and the other blue would be towards the purple side or the red side of the spectrum. So I bought Prussian blue. That's my greeny blue. That became Aubusson. And the other one was ultramarine, which then became Napoleonic, which we'll talk about another time.
That's a whole other podcast, isn't it? So blue generally as a colour range, and this episode will go off on little tangents here and there, but it's all relevant, so bear with us. Blue as a colour range, why is it broad as a colour? And why is this type of blue different to other blues?
Right, well, there's a lot of blues. There are a lot of blues, and that's, again, why people love it. But they stay within a range, I would say. Unlike green, which goes from sort of an incredible verdigris to quite a turquoisey colour, or lime, very, very different. Lime and turquoise, they're very different. So what blue does, it's either dark or it's light. It slightly goes a bit indigo purpley, or it goes slightly just greener. But there isn't that much.
The range is quite tight.
It's quite tight, yeah. But it's a very, very important colour to have because it's it's very grounded. Can I just talk about how the blue, people say blue is calming. And I think, that's absolutely true. Blue is calming. So my studio, or not my studio, my office is all painted in Napoleonic blue. And my bedroom is actually Aubusson Blue. Both places, I need to be calm. And what happens is that the eye, the first colour to reach your eye is red and then yellow. So they're the bright colours that it gets to your eyes, rods and cones and all of that quickly. But the blue takes longer to get there. And so it's not shouting at you, which red and yellow shout at you. You don't need much red for your eye to be attacked.
Attacked, yeah, absolutely.
So blue is very relaxing and very calming. So that's why people find it very nice to be with. Very calming, whether it's dark or light or greeny or bluey, reddy, doesn't matter.
Well, lots of people say, the age-old question, especially with younger people and children, what's your favourite colour?
Yeah.
And often blue is the answer. It is. There must be something in that, as you've just said. And there might be other links as well, with nature, the sky, the sea, a more of an airy-fairy way of looking at it, I suppose.
Well, there is. I mean, it does relate to all of that, but I don't think you paint your wall blue and think, you might do, sky. Anyway, can I just tell you something which I think is amazing? If we do social media, as you know, and then we look at all our stats to see what was the most popular colour or popular post, and do you know what? Consistently, it's the big blue cupboard.
There we go. So if you want to break the internet and get a viral post, paint it blue, make it big, and there we go.
Doesn't happen if it's a small blue piece, it's got to be a huge piece.
Isn't that fascinating?
Everybody just loves it.
It appeals to the masses.
Yeah.
There is something about blue that's scientific and other stuff as well, probably.
Well, you see, can you imagine? You've got a big blue cupboard in your room. It doesn't shout at you. It's there. It's making a beautiful statement. It's lovely, but it's not shouting.
And maybe everyone's channeling their inner Mr. Darcy and thinking back to that and wanting to appear grand and wonderful. Maybe. Who knows?
Taking his white shirt off. Wow.
And back to the topic. Fan her down, someone. So let's go back to your art days. You briefly said then that when you were buying your paints, Prussian blue was needed, and that was one of your colours.
Yeah.
And you were buying the essence to use this.
Yes.
Tell us how that then came into Aubusson Blue many years later when you started to invent chalk paints and create a range of colours. Aubusson Blue, although it was a number at the time, it wasn't called Aubusson Blue. That was one of your original, first 12, was in the what am I trying to say? It was in the original colours in the first 12 lots.
Exactly. So, it was number 4.
There we go. I should have had that.
Aubusson Blue. And I called it Aubusson, which is a bit weird because Aubusson, if you don't know, Aubusson are the most beautiful tapestries made in France from 16th, 17th century, 18th century on. The 18th century ones are what I think of. They are beautiful, big landscape scenes in quite rough tapestry. They're beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so they'd always appeal to me. And it's that greeny blue. It's not a royal blue, it's a greeny blue. It goes with greens, and there'd be flowers and plants in it, but everything was quite muted. Very, very beautiful.
Bringing in some browns as well.
Browns, lots of browns.
So why didn't you call it Berlin blue, for example, or Prussian blue? Why is it just because of your passion for these tapestries and these carpets, and you thought actually that would be a more interesting direction to take it?
Yeah, definitely. And I thought if I call it Prussian blue, people will think they'll either not understand what Prussian is, or they'll link it to just that paint. And it isn't exactly that colour. It's a mixture of, it is my own version of Prussian blue in a way, but I didn't want people to confuse it with the art paint. Mm-hmm. This was a colour which was about interiors. And, it sparks. If you look at an Aubusson tapestry, Google them, have a look. Incredible. And especially the older ones, not the new ones. They are phenomenally just beautiful colours and designs. And so that would be a way for you to go, oh, if I use that blue, I could use that brown and that green and that white and that little bit of yellow. All sorts of other colours can sort of spark off that.
I like that. More accessible for interiors as opposed to the artist's palette. Blue. I think that's really interesting.
Beautifully said.
So we've already discussed that blue is considered to be a very lustrous, rich colour, and we've referenced Jane Austen, Mr. Darcy, grand houses and things. But where were you seeing this colour being used in interiors then? Forget the art side of things.
Yeah.
But how does it link to Sweden? What sort of places are there that exist that you saw at the time that really showcase this amazing Aubusson, Prussian, Berlin blue, whatever we call it?
Yes. So I would be looking at seeing as what I could find. It was quite hard to find references, but I could see photographs of blue interiors in Sweden, and they would be using it with white in it, so it would be pale blues, but also later on it would get darker blues, and they were just used often with quite a limited palette, which I did find really exciting, and something you noticed as well. So you would have the Aubusson Blue with a sort of grey-green and with a pink and lots of white as well. But initially in the grander houses, it would often just be pale blues and whites and gold.
And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Is that because there was a limited range of pigments available at the time, so they could only use what they had? Exactly
right. So, I was saying that they were rich at one point. Now they're not so rich, though they're using what was around. So the red, we'll talk about in the next thing. They could find these reds, bready brown colours. They could get whites from chalks and various other things, and this blue, which became something that they invested in because it worked so well. They loved it. I don't quite know why it would be not expensive, but it wasn't. They must have, maybe that was the thing they went out, I'm going to just splash on the blue.
So for people listening, it's often, this is the difficulty of doing a podcast. People can't see what we're talking about. So how can you explain to people listening what these places in Sweden look like? Try and give everyone a sense of describing it without showing it.
Yeah. So they would be affluent farmers and sort of gentlemen, I suppose. At the beginning, they were what they would call slots. That's like farmhouse. They're not farmhouses. They're manor houses. Mm-hmm. They're manor houses, big manor houses.
So quite grand.
Quite
but
grand.
Quite normal.
But a bit more normal, yes. That was at the beginning, and then later on in the more folky places or the more humble homes, they would have lots of other colours in those, and lots of that's going to be for the second episode. So this one we're more concentrating on the sort of palaces and the grander houses. So one of the places that I went to in Sweden was Drottningholm in Stockholm rather, which was a palace. It's the royal palace. And well, there's some beautiful places there, but one of the things that you can go to see is the old theatre. It's the old 18th century theatre, which was at one point all lit by candles. And now they just light it with electric candles that look like candles. Anyway, there's lots and lots of stuff in there, lots and lots of hand painting. And when you go on our pages, you'll see some of those pictures. So you can see just extraordinarily beautiful fabrics on the wall that they painted. I imagine they painted them, they put the fabric up and then they stenciled or hand painted over it. So it was me talking about not silk, but fabric. Lots of lines painted.
And we love a line.
Oh, we love a line.
We love a wonky line.
I love a wonky line. And these are lovely and wonky.
Yeah.
I really love them. Because everybody says, oh, I can't do lines.
Oh, I know. I hear it all the time.
And then you do it. And then, well, if they're bad, you just sand them away a bit, don't you?
They weren't bad, but they were imperfect. If you look at all of these old photographs and zoom in, they are imperfect. And that's the whole point. Yeah. They're meant to look like that.
They're hand painted. And I think nowadays, because we've got machinery everywhere, we can make a straight line so easily. But actually the joy of a hand painted line, which is slightly wonky and restarted halfway through because you run out of paint, that is the joy. And actually when it's within... So if you did, so what they would do is a panel. Let's imagine a panel, not a square panel, but mainly it would be a portrait type panel, not always. And then they would do lines within lines, so a fatter line and a thinner line, and sometimes with nice corners, which were sort of quite fancy. I will show you some photographs of those. And they would have a dado, and in the dado that would sometimes be marked. I also, so I'm talking about lines, they're all lots of beautiful lines, but they would also do things like splattering. So it looked like granite. So all they would do is get some paint, have a background colour, you could blend it beautifully, then you'd get some greys and splatter it with little dots all over it.
So they were starting to experiment with decorative finishes, faux finishes, sort of.
Yep.
Going back to the panel thing, I've just thought of this whilst we were talking then. Why... Because I've seen these photos and you're right, there's rooms which are quite large with panels sort of divided into these sections. Why did people do that? Was it because they didn't have an abundance of artwork to put on the walls, so they were trying to divide the room up and give it interest, or was there a better reason? I
think you're absolutely right. It was also quite French. If you go, that would be a way to divide rooms and walls, and so that otherwise you've got
it's just a big
huge expanse of one colour or not very much. So you would divide it up into lots of curly bits and what have you. Carving then would have been much more easy. There were plenty of people who could carve, and so you could get lovely roundels and edgings and
lots of wood, I suppose. Going back to the wood in Sweden.
Absolutely. In Sweden, that was all done like that. And going back to furniture too, they would have gorgeous little, they're bows. They would have a sort of a roundel with bows next to it.
Quite
just
frilly.
Beautiful.
Some of it was very grand and frilly, wasn't it? But some of it was just very simple and
very
funky.
Simple, some of it was quite basic, and it would be, back to what I was talking about, the man who was a simple carpenter copying. They may have had one beautiful chair and he copied for the other ones, and it would have got simpler.
And it does link to Bloomsbury and Charleston Farmhouse, doesn't it? It's that way of thinking. It's always been a thing, and I see huge similarities between the two countries and styles. But it's that idea of taking a room and just decorating it.
I think certainly when we do the second program where we're going to do the humbler homes.
Yeah.
That is when people did let their imagination go a little bit more. There's more colour going on. With the grander house, it's still looking to France. France was the place, and they looked up to France because even though they'd had money and they did have money, France was the epitome of style.
And didn't they even speak French in the royal courts in Sweden? So they were a bit obsessed and a bit kind of in awe of France in many ways.
Yeah. And it continues. We still do. We love France.
Yeah. So in terms of copying their lines and their styles and the sort of interior trends, did it originate in France first then? Or do we not really know that?
I'm not really sure, because I think what happened is that because you'd copy something, you'd copy it, and in copying, as you know, whenever you copy, things get translated, and someone says, well, they had a little blobby bit that went up, but I'm going to do a little blobby bit that goes down.
And it's also what came first, the chicken or the egg? Who did it first? But they were very closely linked.
They were closely linked in the beginning, and then I think now Sweden, if you compared a 18th century Swedish thing to an 18th century French thing, you'd probably think, they don't look the same. There's certainly a very, very strong Swedish style.
They took elements of the French and made it a completely sort of different style, I suppose.
It developed,
It's interesting though, isn't it? To see how they link.
I love it. I mean, I think the Swedes took it and ran with it.
Yeah.
I'm still really, I've got one of my favourite books, and if anybody can get hold of it, we'll tell you what it is. It's called The Swedish Room by Lars Soberg and Ursula Soberg, and it was a book that was published in 1994, and I just look at those pictures again and again and again. I think that there's just so much in there. Colour combos, styles, patterns. I do relate, obviously, to the more simple things, but there's just so much. I mean, for this program, I just started looking again, and I'm like, I completely forgot about that. That's a new thing that I could be doing.
And I've been completely introduced to it, really, in terms of Swedish design, and everyone knows a little bit, but not a lot. It's only when you start researching that you become totally inspired.
Yeah. And I will also let you into a secret that the paint that they were using was very, I would say, I'm hoping it's very similar to what I made, because that was one of my big influences, because I could see that this paint had a softness. I used to see some furniture coming into the country too. You would get at the very big auction houses, Swedish painted furniture, and I could see it had something very different. Sometimes it was made from eggs. The paint was made of eggs. So that would be what we call egg tempera. So it was very, very strong. So they would make their paint from egg and a little bit of oil and pigment, and they painted their furniture. So strong. I mean, if you ever made egg, you've had not a boiled egg.
I've had a boiled egg before. I've had all types of egg.
When you have a runny egg and you can't get it off your plate.
Well, we had a conversation yesterday about Weetabix.
Yeah.
Similar kind of thing. Dried Weetabix is the devil. It is like cement. God forbid your child leaves a bowl of half-eaten Weetabix on the side overnight, because it will be rock solid. But I find it fascinating that you've not only been inspired by the colour, which, linking it back to Aubusson Blue, but actually the quality of the paint, the way it feels, the softness and the way it looks. I think that's amazing.
You can just see, I've just got the cover of that book, and you can see there's a white, one of these Mora type clocks, thank you. And you can just see that white is sort of just a beautiful, I suppose, an old white, but it's definitely what I would call old white, but it's got that chalky feel, and that's what I was after.
And I find it amazing to think of you having this piece of furniture, or seeing this piece of furniture, feeling this piece of furniture from Sweden, inspired by the artwork, inspired by the finish, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I can also imagine you doing a little scratch test on the paintwork and seeing, gosh, this is strong. This is This is inspiring in itself.
Well, you realise it was very old and it really hadn't worn that much. But it just had a beautiful finish. And so, yeah, that's what really inspired me over the years. To begin with, when I was making my paint, that's what I was after.
Amazing. I didn't know that. So we very much describe Aubusson Blue as strongly inspired by Sweden and Swedish design. And of course, this remains one of the key colours in interiors today. Yeah. This mini-series of 2 episodes, we're going to focus on this style more. We've touched upon a few things, and we keep talking about episode 2, which is coming next, which will continue with that Swedish and Gustavian influence, but we're going to focus on Scandinavian pink. So tell us a little tiny bit about Scandinavian pink and how we transitioned from Aubusson Blue within the same time period to a completely different colour.
Well, I think I might have given a little clue away because I said that copper was one of the big things that Sweden was famous for and became rich. And in the making of copper, which wouldn't have been huge factories, I think they would have probably been local factories or not little industries. There was a byproduct, and that byproduct was a colour called Fallon Red. Ta-da!
Say no more. There we go. So that's coming up on the next episode.
Yeah.
I think we've explored blues in a wonderful way. Is there anything we've missed that you'd like to say?
There is. We didn't really talk about Gustavian because Gustavian is what people call it often. Gustavian style, Gustavian colour. Who was Gustav? So I'll just say that all it is Gustav was, there were 2 kings in Sweden, and it's that period of time that was all painted furniture, which they happen to coincide with. So just in case you're wondering, they didn't mention Gustavian.
As a little teaser for episode 2, bring in a new word at the very end. But I suppose it goes back, it links to that, to the rich, to the wealthy, and the royalty.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so much more to talk about. And it just gets more and more interesting the more you find out about it.
Well, I mean, I could talk about this forever. There is so much that you could do. And I just want to show everybody. And I love the fact that I've been able to introduce you to this whole area because I know you knew a little bit, but you didn't realise quite how big it was and why I'm still obsessed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, taking one thing, for example, the lines in rooms. Obviously, I know what a line is. I know what a wonky line is. I know what panelling is. I know what fake panelling is with paint. But you don't necessarily understand where it comes from and why it was so important. So it's been very, very good to learn about that.
I'm really enjoying doing this podcast. There's so much I want to talk about, say. I mean, it's all in here and I'm dying to get it out. So to get to hear more, please like and subscribe and leave a review because that's the way that we rise up and in the ratings and more people will hear it. So we'd love to get your help.
Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can follow us on Instagram for photos of what we're talking about and a whole host of other exciting stuff as well, by the way. So on Instagram, I am Doghead Designs and Annie is
Annie Sloan Stagram, as well as, of course, we're on Annie Sloan Home and Chalk Paint. But for this, it's Annie Sloan Stagram.
Thank you very much for listening. We will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much.